The glittering lights of Dubai's skyline pierced the night sky as Zain al-Rashid stepped out of his Lamborghini Aventador. At 23, he was the epitome of wealth and privilege, his tailored Armani suit a second skin that barely contained his arrogance. The valet's eyes widened, a mixture of awe and envy, as Zain tossed him the keys with careless grace. "Take care of her," Zain said, his voice a lazy drawl. "She's worth more than you'll make in a lifetime." The lobby of the Burj Al Arab, the world's only 7-star hotel, welcomed him like a returning prince. And why shouldn't it? The Al-Rashid name carried weight, opening doors and commanding respect wherever it was uttered. As Zain strode across the marble floor, his presence causing a ripple of whispers and sidelong glances. As he entered the elevator, his phone buzzed, a message from Tariq, his self-proclaimed best friend and partner in debauchery. "Where are you, man? The party's already wild." Zain smirked. Of course it was. He had spared no expense for this gathering, renting out the entire top floor of the hotel. It was a celebration of excess, of youth, of the untouchable feeling that came with having the world at your feet. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Music pulsed through the air, the bass so deep it seemed to vibrate in Zain's chest. Beautiful people in designer clothes moved like a single organism, drinks in hand, laughter on their lips. This was his kingdom, and these were his loyal subjects. "There he is!" Tariq's voice boomed over the music. He appeared at Zain's side, already slightly unsteady on his feet. "The man of the hour!" Zain allowed himself to be pulled into the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. As he moved through the throng, he caught snippets of conversation, all centered around him and his latest business triumph. "Did you hear? He closed the deal on that new development in Abu Dhabi. I heard it's worth billions." "Of course it is. Everything the Al-Rashids touch turns to gold." He basked in the attention, letting it wash over him like a warm breeze. This was what he lived for, the adulation, the envy, the feeling of being untouchable. Yet as he plastered on his trademark smirk and raised his glass in a toast, a familiar emptiness gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. Zain pushed the feeling aside, drowning it in another sip of champagne. He wouldn't let anything ruin this night, least of all his own traitorous thoughts. As the night wore on, the party reached a fever pitch. Zain found himself on the balcony, overlooking the city he practically owned. Dubai sprawled before him, a glittering testament to ambition and excess. It was a view he had seen 1,000 times, yet it never failed to stir something in him. Pride, perhaps, or a sense of destiny. "Quite a view, isn't it?" A voice behind him made him turn. Layla, a model he had been casually seeing, sidled up to him. Her dress left little to the imagination, and her smile held promises of pleasures to come. "It's all right," Zain replied, his tone deliberately nonchalant. "But I prefer the view right here." Layla giggled, pressing herself against him. "Always the charmer, Zain. But tell me, don't you ever get bored of all this?" For a moment, Zain's mask slipped. Bored? No, not bored. Empty, perhaps. Unfulfilled, definitely. But he'd be damned if he let anyone see that vulnerability. "Bored?" He scoffed, wrapping an arm around Layla's waist. "With a life like this, never." Before Layla could respond, Tariq burst onto the balcony, his eyes wild with excitement. "Zain! You won't believe what just happened." Zain raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued despite himself. "What is it now, Tariq?" Tariq grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I just made the most interesting bet, and you, my friend, are the star player." A sense of unease crept over Zain, but he masked it with a smirk. "Oh? And what game am I playing?" Tariq's grin widened. "The game of love, my friend. Or should I say, the game of conquest." As Tariq began to explain the details of the bet, Zain felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Excitement, trepidation, and a strange sense of foreboding. Little did he know that this bet, made in the heat of a drunken moment, would be the catalyst for a journey that would shake the very foundations of his world. Inside, the party raged on, oblivious to the conversation that would set in motion a series of events that would change Zain's life forever. As he listened to Tariq, the glittering lights of Dubai seemed to dim, and for the first time in years, Zain felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name, a challenge perhaps, or the first stirrings of a change he never saw coming. The morning sun crept through the gaps in the curtains, painting streaks of light across Zayn's face. He groaned, his head pounding from the excesses of the night before. As consciousness slowly returned, fragments of the previous evening began to surface in his mind. The party, the drinks, Tariq's excited face on the balcony, and the bet. Zayn sat up abruptly, instantly regretting the sudden movement as a wave of nausea washed over him. The bet. It wasn't a dream. He had actually agreed to Tariq's ludicrous challenge. "You have 24 hours, Tariq's voice echoed in his memory. 24 hours to win over that cleaning girl from your building, the one with the fire in her eyes who always looks at us like we're dirt under her shoes. If you can get her to agree to a date, you win. If not, well, let's just say your reputation as Dubai's most eligible bachelor might take a hit." Zayn ran a hand through his disheveled hair, cursing under his breath. What had possessed him to agree to such a ridiculous wager? He was Zayn al-Rashid, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the Middle East. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, least of all to Tariq and his drunken challenges. And yet, the thought of backing down made his stomach churn more than the hangover. Zayn al-Rashid was many things, but a coward was not one of them. Besides, how hard could it be? He had never met a woman he couldn't charm if he set his mind to it. With a groan, he dragged himself out of bed and into the shower. As the hot water cascaded over him, washing away the remnants of last night's party, Zayn began to formulate a plan. He would approach this like any other business deal, identify the target, assess her weaknesses, and make his move. Simple. An hour later, freshly groomed and dressed in a casual yet undeniably expensive outfit, Zayn made his way down to the lobby of his building. He knew the cleaning staff usually started their rounds at this time, and he was determined to accidentally run into his target. As he stepped out of the elevator, he spotted her immediately. She was bent over a cleaning cart, organizing supplies, her back to him. Even in the unflattering uniform, Zayn couldn't help but notice the graceful curve of her spine, the way her dark hair was neatly tied back in a practical bun. He approached, clearing his throat to announce his presence. "Excuse me," he began, his voice smooth as silk. The girl turned, and Zayn found himself momentarily speechless. He had seen her before, of course, passing her in the hallways or catching glimpses as she worked, but he had never really looked at her. Now, face to face, he was struck by the intensity of her gaze. Her eyes, a deep brown, seemed to look right through him, assessing and dismissing him in the span of a heartbeat. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but cool. Zayn recovered quickly, flashing his most charming smile. "I hope so. I seem to have misplaced my keycard. I was wondering if you could let me into my apartment." It was a lie, of course. His keycard was safely tucked into his pocket. But it was an excuse to engage her, to begin the dance of seduction he had perfected over the years. The girl's expression didn't change. "Of course, sir. Which apartment is yours?" "The penthouse," Zayn replied, unable to keep a hint of pride from his voice. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, or a touch of disdain. "I see. Follow me, please." As they walked towards the elevator, Zayn studied her profile. Up close, he could see the fatigue etched around her eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders that spoke of long hours and hard work. Yet there was a dignity in her bearing, a quiet strength that intrigued him. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said as they stepped into the elevator. "I'm Zayn al-Rashid." She glanced at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I know who you are, Mr. al-Rashid. Everyone in this building does." Zayn chuckled, leaning casually against the elevator wall. "And yet, I find myself at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know yours." For a moment, he thought she might not answer. Then softly she said, "Amira, my name is Amira." "Amira," Zayn repeated, savoring the name. "It suits you. It means princess, doesn't it?" A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "It does, though I assure you, Mr. al-Rashid, my life is far from that of a princess." The elevator doors opened, and Amira stepped out, Zayn following close behind. As they approached his penthouse, he decided to make his move. "Listen, Amira," he began, his voice low and intimate. "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me sometime. I know this amazing little restaurant that—" "Mr. al-Rashid," Amira interrupted, her voice firm. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Zayn standing in front of his apartment, stunned into silence. For the first time in years, he had been rejected, and he wasn't quite sure how to process it. As he watched Amira's retreating form, Zayn felt something stir within him. It wasn't just about the bet anymore. He had been challenged, and Zayn al-Rashid never backed down from a challenge. Little did he know that this encounter was just the beginning of a journey that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. Zayn paced his penthouse, his mind racing. Amira's rejection stung more than he cared to admit. He wasn't used to being dismissed so easily, especially by someone he considered beneath his social status. The rational part of his brain told him to forget about her, to move on to easier conquests, but something about Amira's quiet dignity and fierce independence had gotten under his skin. He found himself drawn to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the Dubai skyline. The city sprawled before him, a testament to ambition and wealth. Yet for the first time he felt a twinge of dissatisfaction. What good was all this if he couldn't even convince one cleaning girl to have dinner with him? A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. It was Tariq, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "So," Tariq drawled, sauntering into the apartment, "how goes the conquest, oh mighty Zayn?" Zayn scowled. "It's a work in progress." Tariq's eyebrows shot up. "Don't tell me she actually turned you down, the great Zayn al-Rashid, rejected by a cleaning girl?" "She has a name," Zayn snapped, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "It's Amira." Tariq's grin widened. "Ooh, touchy. Don't tell me you're actually starting to care about this bet." Zayn turned away, unwilling to let his friend see the confusion in his eyes. "Of course not. It's just a challenge. Nothing more." "Well, you better figure it out fast," Tariq said, flopping onto Zayn's designer couch. "You've only got about 20 hours left. Tick-tock, my friend." After Tariq left, Zayn found himself unable to shake thoughts of Amira. He needed to understand her, to find a way past her defenses. On a whim, he called the building manager. "I need information on one of your employees," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Amira, the cleaning girl." The manager hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure I can—" "I'm not asking," Zayn cut in. "I'm telling." A few minutes later, he had what he needed. Amira lived in one of the poorer districts of Dubai. She was supporting a sick mother and a younger sister, and, most interestingly, she was taking night classes, studying psychology. Armed with this information, Zayn formulated a new plan. If charm and wealth wouldn't work, perhaps understanding and empathy might. It was a foreign concept to him, but he was willing to try anything to win this bet, and to unravel the mystery that was Amira. The next morning, Zayn positioned himself in the lobby, a stack of books under his arm. He had spent half the night researching popular psychology texts, determined to create a connection. When Amira entered, pushing her cleaning cart, Zayn affected an air of distraction. He pretended to stumble, sending the books scattering across the floor. Amira rushed over, her instinct to help overriding her wariness of him. "Mr. al-Rashid, are you all right?" Zayn looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, Amira. Yes, I'm fine. Just a bit clumsy this morning." As they gathered the books, Amira's eyes widened in recognition. "The Interpretation of Dreams by Freud? Man and His Symbols by Jung? I didn't realize you were interested in psychology." Zayn saw his opening and took it. "Oh yes, it's a recent interest. I find the human mind fascinating, but I'm afraid much of it goes over my head. Perhaps you could help me understand some of these concepts." Amira's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And why would you think I could help?" Zayn allowed a hint of vulnerability to show in his expression. "I may have asked about you. I know you're studying psychology. I apologize if that was inappropriate. But I was intrigued. You're not like anyone else in this building, Amira. You have depth, substance. I'd like to understand that better." For a moment, Amira seemed torn. Zayn could see the conflict in her eyes, suspicion warring with a genuine passion for her subject. Finally, she sighed. "I have a break in an hour. Meet me in the staff room if you're serious about discussing these books." As Amira walked away, Zayn felt an unexpected thrill of victory. But it was tinged with something else, something he couldn't quite name. Was it guilt? Or perhaps the stirring of genuine interest? An hour later, Zayn found himself in the stark utilitarian staff room, a far cry from his usual luxurious surroundings. Amira was already there, her uniform exchanged for simple jeans and a t-shirt. Without the trappings of her job, she looked younger, more vulnerable, yet somehow even more intriguing. "So," she said, eyeing him warily, "where do you want to start?" As they began to discuss the books, Zain found himself genuinely engaged. Amira's passion for psychology was evident in every word she spoke. She explained complex theories with clarity and insight, her eyes lighting up as she delved into the intricacies of the human mind. For the first time in years, Zain felt the stirring of real curiosity. He asked questions not to impress or manipulate, but because he genuinely wanted to know more. As their discussion deepened, he caught glimpses of the person behind Amira's protective shell, intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely determined. Before he knew it, their hour was up. Amira glanced at her watch, looking surprised. "I need to get back to work," she said, a note of reluctance in her voice. As she stood to leave, Zain found himself reaching out, gently touching her arm. "Amira, wait. I'd like to continue this conversation, perhaps over dinner." Amira hesitated, studying his face. For a moment, Zain thought she might agree, but then her expression hardened. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I appreciate the discussion we've had, but let's not pretend this is anything more than what it is. You're the wealthy heir, I'm the cleaning girl. Our worlds don't intersect. It's better for both of us if we remember that." With that, she left, leaving Zain alone in the staff room, surrounded by the remnants of their conversation. As he sat there, he realized that for the first time in his life, he had engaged in a genuine, meaningful exchange with someone outside his social circle. And despite achieving his goal of getting closer to Amira, he felt strangely hollow. The bet suddenly seemed trivial, even distasteful. But more than that, Zain found himself wanting to know more about Amira, not as a conquest, but as a person. As he left the staff room, he knew that something had shifted. The question was he ready to face what that shift might mean? The next morning, Zain woke with a strange sense of unease. The conversation with Amira had left him feeling off balance, questioning things he'd never given a second thought to before. As he went through his usual morning routine, designer suit, imported coffee, chauffeur-driven Bentley to the office, everything felt oddly hollow. At the Al-Rashid Enterprises headquarters, Zain found it difficult to focus on the day's meetings and contracts. His mind kept drifting back to Amira's words, her passion for psychology, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her studies. It was so different from the vapid conversations he was used to in his social circle. "Mr. Al-Rashid?" His assistant's voice snapped him back to reality. "Your uncle is here to see you." Zain straightened in his chair, composing himself. Uncle Faisal was a key figure in the family business, and not someone to be caught daydreaming in front of. Faisal strode into the office, his presence commanding as always. "Zain, my boy," he said, his tone a mix of affection and scrutiny. "How are things progressing with the new development in Abu Dhabi?" "On schedule, Uncle," Zain replied, pulling up the relevant files on his computer. "We're set to break ground next month." As they discussed the project, Zain found his mind wandering again. He thought about Amira, about the struggles she must face every day. How different would her life be if she had been born into a family like his? "Zain?" Faisal's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you listening? This isn't like you to be so distracted." Zain shook his head, trying to clear it. "I'm sorry, Uncle. I've had a lot on my mind lately." Faisal's eyes narrowed. "I hope you're not letting your social life interfere with business. The Al-Rashid name carries responsibilities, Zain. Your father built this empire from nothing. It's our duty to preserve and expand it." The mention of his father sent a pang through Zain's chest. It had been 5 years since the accident that took his parents, but the pain still felt fresh at times. "I understand, Uncle. I won't let you down." After Faisal left, Zain found himself staring out the window at the bustling city below. He thought about his father, about the legacy he was expected to uphold. But for the first time, he wondered if there might be more to life than just accumulating wealth and power. As the day wore on, Zain made a decision. He wouldn't pursue Amira for the sake of the bet anymore. But he did want to understand her world better. With a few quick phone calls, he arranged for a substantial anonymous donation to be made to the psychology department at the university where Amira studied. That evening, instead of heading to his usual high-end restaurants or exclusive clubs, Zain found himself driving to Amira's neighborhood. He parked his car, a less ostentatious model he kept for rare occasions when he didn't want to be recognized, and walked the streets, taking in the sights and sounds of a world so different from his own. The streets were narrow and crowded, filled with the aroma of spices from small restaurants and the chatter of families gathered on tiny balconies. Children played soccer in alleyways, their laughter echoing off the walls. It was a far cry from the sterile luxury Zain was accustomed to, but there was a vibrancy here that he found oddly appealing. As he turned a corner, he spotted a small bookstore, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight. On impulse, he went inside. The shop was cramped but cozy, shelves overflowing with books in various languages. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter, greeting Zain with a friendly nod. Zain found himself drawn to a section on psychology. He ran his fingers over the spines, recognizing some titles from his conversation with Amira. Without really thinking about it, he selected a few books, including one on trauma and healing that he vaguely remembered Amira mentioning. As he approached the counter to pay, something caught his eye. It was a beautiful, leather-bound edition of 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Zain had never read it, but he knew it was a classic of Latin American literature. On a whim, he added it to his purchase. Outside the bookstore, Zain paused, unsure of what to do next. The bet's deadline was approaching, but he realized he no longer cared about winning. Something had shifted in him, a curiosity awakened that he couldn't ignore. He spotted a small cafe across the street, nothing like the upscale establishments he usually frequented. Making a decision, he walked in and ordered a simple black coffee. As he sat by the window, new books by his side, Zain felt a strange sense of peace. Opening 100 Years of Solitude, he began to read. The magical realism of Marquez's world slowly enveloped him, transporting him far from the pressures of his own life. For the first time in years, Zain lost track of time, engrossed in a story that had nothing to do with business deals or social status. As the cafe owner gently reminded him they were closing, Zain realized hours had passed. He gathered his books and stepped out into the night, feeling as though he'd awakened from a long sleep. On the drive home, Zain made a resolution. He would find a way to give the Garcia Marquez book to Amira, not as part of any game or bet, but as a genuine gesture, and perhaps in doing so, he might start to bridge the vast gulf between their worlds. Little did Zain know that this simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his world, and the true meaning of connection. The following morning, Zain arrived at his building earlier than usual, the leather-bound copy of 100 Years of Solitude tucked under his arm. He had spent half the night reading, captivated by Marquez's prose and the vivid world he created. Now he was eager to share this discovery with Amira. As he stepped into the lobby, he saw her pushing her cleaning cart towards the elevator. Taking a deep breath, he approached. "Amira," he called softly. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you're up early." Zain nodded, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous. I have something for you." He held out the book. Amira's eyes widened as she took in the beautiful leather binding. "Is this 100 Years of Solitude?" Zain finished for her. "I remembered you mentioning Latin American literature during our conversation. I thought you might enjoy this." Amira hesitated, her hand hovering over the book. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I can't accept this. It's too expensive and Please," Zain interrupted, his voice sincere. "It's not about the money. I started reading it last night, and I was amazed. I've never experienced anything like it. I wanted to share that with you." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Amira slowly took the book, cradling it gently. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is very thoughtful." For a moment they stood in silence, an unspoken connection hanging between them. Then Amira cleared her throat. "I should get back to work." As she turned to go, Zain called out, "Amira, wait. I was wondering, would you be willing to discuss the book with me once you've read it? Maybe over coffee?" Amira paused, studying him intently. Zain held his breath, realizing how much he wanted her to say yes. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Al-Rashid. Coffee, but just to discuss the book." Zain felt a rush of unexpected joy. Of course. And please call me Zain. As Amira disappeared into the elevator, Zain found himself smiling. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business or social status. Later that day, as Zain sat in his office reviewing contracts, his phone buzzed. It was Tariq. "So, my friend," Tariq's voice dripped with amusement. "The 24 hours are up. Did you manage to win over our little cleaning girl?" Zain felt a surge of irritation. "Her name is Amira," he snapped. "And no, I didn't win her over. The bet is off, Tariq." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Off? What do you mean, off? Zain al-Rashid doesn't back down from a challenge." "Maybe it's time I did," Zain replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "This whole thing was childish and disrespectful. I'm done with it." He could hear Tariq's disbelief. "Who are you, and what have you done with Zain? Don't tell me you've actually developed feelings for this girl." Zain hesitated. Had he? The thought was both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. "Goodbye, Tariq," he said, ending the call before his friend could respond. As he set down his phone, Zain noticed his uncle Faisal standing in the doorway, a strange expression on his face. "Uncle," Zain said, straightening in his chair. "I didn't see you there." Faisal entered the office, his eyes narrowed. "I couldn't help overhearing Zain. What's this about a bet? And who is this Amira?" Zain felt a flicker of unease. "It's nothing, uncle. Just a misunderstanding with Tariq." Faisal sat down across from him, his gaze piercing. "Zain, I hope you remember what I said about responsibilities. The Al-Rashid name carries weight. We can't afford distractions or scandals." "I understand, uncle," Zain replied, a hint of defiance creeping into his voice. "But I'm not a child anymore. I can make my own decisions." Faisal leaned back, studying him. "Very well. But remember, Zain, everything you do reflects on this family and this company. Don't forget that." As his uncle left, Zain felt a weight settling on his shoulders. He had always known his life came with expectations and responsibilities, but for the first time, he was starting to question whether those expectations aligned with what he truly wanted. That evening, as Zain drove home, he found himself taking a detour through Amira's neighborhood again. He parked his car and walked the lively streets, observing the families and friends gathered in small cafes and on stoops. There was a sense of community here, of life being lived fully, that was absent in his world of high-rise apartments and exclusive clubs. As he walked, Zain's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but he knew instantly who it was from. "Thank you for the book. It's beautiful. I've started reading it and I understand why you were so captivated. Maybe we can discuss it over coffee next week." "Amira." Zain felt a warmth spread through his chest. He quickly typed a reply, agreeing to meet. As he hit send, he realized he was smiling again. Standing there, in the middle of a bustling street so far removed from his usual world, Zain felt as though he was standing on the precipice of something life-changing. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential conflicts and challenges, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. As he made his way back to his car, Zain knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The question was he ready for the changes that lay ahead? The week passed in a blur for Zain. By day he attended meetings and oversaw projects, but his mind constantly drifted to thoughts of Amira and their upcoming coffee date. He found himself rereading passages of 100 Years of Solitude, making notes and pondering questions he wanted to ask her. Finally, the day arrived. Zain chose a small, unassuming cafe in a neutral part of town, hoping to make Amira feel comfortable. He arrived early, nervously adjusting his casual shirt, a far cry from his usual designer suits. When Amira walked in, Zain's breath caught in his throat. Outside of her work uniform, dressed in simple jeans and a flowing top, she looked radiant. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical bun, fell in soft waves around her face. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I hope I'm not late." Zain shook his head, smiling. "Not at all, I'm glad you could make it." There was a moment of awkward silence before Amira pulled out her copy of the book. "So," she began, her eyes lighting up, "what did you think about the magical realism elements?" Just like that, the ice was broken. They dove into a passionate discussion about the novel, debating interpretations and sharing favorite passages. Zain found himself captivated not just by the book, but by Amira's insights and the way her face came alive as she spoke. "You know," Amira said, sipping her coffee, "I never expected to be having this conversation with you of all people." Zain raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why is that?" Amira hesitated, then spoke frankly. "To be honest, I always thought you were just another rich playboy. All surface, no substance." Her words stung, but Zain couldn't deny the truth in them. "And now?" he asked softly. Amira studied him for a moment. "Now, I'm not so sure. You're surprising me, Zain al-Rashid." As their conversation continued, flowing from literature to psychology to their personal lives, Zain felt a connection growing between them. He learned about Amira's struggles to support her family while pursuing her education, her dreams of opening a community mental health clinic. "It's not easy," Amira admitted, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing an impossible dream." Without thinking, Zain reached out and placed his hand over hers. "It's not impossible," he said firmly. "Your passion and dedication are inspiring, Amira. I believe you'll make it happen." Amira looked at their hands, then back at Zain's face. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air charged with unspoken emotions. Suddenly, Amira pulled her hand away, glancing at her watch. "I should go," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "I have a class this evening." As they stood to leave, Zain felt an overwhelming urge to prolong their time together. "Amira," he said quickly, "I was wondering if you'd like to do this again sometime. Maybe we could read another book together." Amira hesitated, conflict clear in her eyes. "Zain, I'm not sure that's a good idea. We come from very different worlds. This was nice, but different worlds can intersect," Zain interrupted, surprising himself with his earnestness. "Please, Amira, just think about it." After a long moment, Amira nodded. "I'll think about it," she said softly, before turning and walking away. Zain watched her go, a mixture of hope and uncertainty swirling in his chest. He knew he was treading dangerous waters, but he couldn't bring himself to care. As he left the cafe, Zain's phone buzzed. It was a message from his uncle Faisal. "Need to see you in the office." Urgent matter to discuss. Frowning, Zain made his way to Al-Rashid Enterprises. He found his uncle in the boardroom, looking grim. "Zain," Faisal said as he entered, "we have a situation. One of our major projects in Abu Dhabi is facing significant delays. The local authorities are threatening to pull our permits." Zain's mind raced, instantly shifting into business mode. "What happened?" "We were on schedule last week," Faisal sighed heavily. "It seems there were some irregularities in our permit applications. Nothing major, but enough to raise red flags." Zain's blood ran cold. "Irregularities? Uncle, please tell me we didn't—" "We did what was necessary," Faisal cut him off sharply. "This project is worth billions, Zain. Sometimes in business we have to operate in grey areas." Zain felt a wave of nausea. He had always known that the family business wasn't always strictly above board, but he had never been confronted with it so directly before. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice hollow. Faisal's eyes hardened. "I need you to go to Abu Dhabi. Use your charm, your connections. Smooth things over. Make this problem disappear, Zain. The family is counting on you." As Zain left the office, his head spinning, he felt as though he was being torn in two. On one side was the weight of his family legacy, the expectations that had been placed on him since birth. On the other was the growing realization that perhaps this wasn't the life he wanted. His phone buzzed again. "A message from Amira. I've been thinking, maybe we could read Love in the Time of Cholera next." Staring at the message, Zain felt a glimmer of hope. He typed back a quick reply. "I'd love that, but I have to go to Abu Dhabi for a while. Business emergency, rain check?" As he sent the message, Zain realized he was standing at a crossroads. The choices he made in the coming days would shape not just his future, but potentially the lives of many others. The question was, did he have the courage to choose the path that felt right, even if it meant disappointing those who had always dictated his life? With a heavy heart and a conflicted mind, Zain headed home to pack for Abu Dhabi, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that things could never go back to the way they were before. The scorching Abu Dhabi sun beat down on Zain as he exited his chauffeured car, straightening his tailored suit. 2 weeks had passed since he'd arrived in the Emirate, and the strain was beginning to show on his face. Endless meetings, tense negotiations, and late-night strategy sessions had taken their toll. As he rode the elevator to yet another high-level meeting, Zayn's mind wandered to Amira. They had exchanged a few brief messages during his time away, but the distance felt greater than just the physical miles between them. He longed for the easy conversation they'd shared over coffee, the intellectual stimulation that had nothing to do with business deals or family expectations. The elevator doors opened, snapping Zayn back to reality. He plastered on his most charming smile and strode into the conference room, ready to once again play the role of the charismatic businessman. Hours later, Zayn collapsed onto the plush sofa in his hotel suite, loosening his tie with a heavy sigh. He had managed to smooth over most of the issues with the project, calling in favors and making promises that left a sour taste in his mouth. The permits would be reinstated, the project would move forward, but at what cost? His phone buzzed, and for a moment, Zayn hoped it might be Amira. Instead, it was his uncle Faisal. "Excellent work, Zayn." Faisal's voice boomed through the speaker. "I knew you wouldn't let the family down. You've saved us millions." Zayn felt a twinge of guilt. "Uncle, about those irregularities in the permit applications." Now, Faisal cut him off. "Best not to dwell on such things. What's done is done. You should be proud, Zayn. You're proving yourself worthy of the Al Rashid name." As the call ended, Zayn stared at his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him was successful, powerful, everything he'd been groomed to be. But for the first time, he wondered if that man was truly him. On impulse, he picked up his phone again and dialed Amira's number. To his surprise, she answered on the second ring. "Zayn." Her voice was a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Is everything okay?" "Amira," he breathed, suddenly at a loss for words. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you all right?" Amira asked, concern evident in her tone. "You sound different." Zayn closed his eyes, leaning back on the sofa. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Being here, doing what I'm doing, it's making me question things." "What kind of things?" Amira's voice was soft, encouraging. "Everything," Zayn said, surprising himself with his honesty. "My life, my choices, what I want for my future. Amira, I think I'm changing." There was another pause, longer this time. When Amira spoke again, her voice was filled with warmth. "Change can be good, Zayn. It means you're growing." They talked for over an hour, Zayn pouring out his doubts and fears, Amira listening and offering gentle insights. By the time they said goodbye, Zayn felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The next morning, as Zayn prepared for another day of meetings, he made a decision. He would finish what he came to do in Abu Dhabi, but when he returned to Dubai, things would be different. He wasn't sure exactly how, but he knew he couldn't go back to the person he was before. As the days passed, Zayn threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, not to prove himself to his family, but to finish this chapter of his life. In his free moments, he researched community development projects and mental health initiatives, inspired by Amira's passion. Finally, after 3 grueling weeks, the crisis was averted. The project was back on track, and Zayn was free to return to Dubai. As he boarded his private jet, he felt a mix of relief and anticipation. During the flight, Zayn penned a long email to Amira, explaining everything that had happened in Abu Dhabi and his newfound desire to make a positive change in the world. His finger hovered over the send button for several long moments before he finally pressed it, his heart racing. As the plane touched down in Dubai, Zayn's phone buzzed with a reply from Amira. "I'm proud of you, Zayn. It takes courage to question the path laid out for you. When you're ready, I'd like to show you something. Meet me at the community center in my neighborhood tomorrow at 2 p.m, if you can." Zayn felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. He quickly typed back his agreement, then stepped off the plane into the familiar Dubai heat. As he was driven back to his penthouse, Zayn gazed out at the city he'd always known. The gleaming skyscrapers and luxury cars suddenly seemed less impressive, less important. His mind was filled with thoughts of Amira, of the life she led, and of the person he was slowly becoming. Tomorrow, he knew, would be the beginning of something new. As he drifted off to sleep that night, Zayn felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them with open eyes and an open heart. Little did he know that the next day would bring revelations that would shake the very foundations of his world, forcing him to make choices that would alter the course of his life forever. The next day, Zayn found himself nervously adjusting his casual shirt as he stood outside the community center in Amira's neighborhood. It was a modest building, a far cry from the gleaming towers of his usual haunts. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground, and the aroma of spices wafted from surrounding apartments. At precisely 2 p.m., Amira appeared, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You came," she said, a note of pleasant surprise in her voice. "Of course," Zayn replied, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. "I wouldn't miss it." Amira led him inside the center, explaining as they walked, "This place is a lifeline for many in the community. We offer after-school programs, adult education classes, and basic health services." As they toured the facility, Zayn was struck by the warmth and energy of the place. Despite the limited resources, there was a sense of purpose and community that was palpable. They stopped at a small room at the end of a corridor. "And this," Amira said, her voice filled with pride, "is where I volunteer twice a week. It's our mental health counseling room." Zayn stepped inside, taking in the modest furnishings and the wall covered in children's drawings. "This is amazing, Amira, but why are you showing me all this?" Amira's expression turned serious. "Because I wanted you to see what real impact looks like, Zayn. It's not about grand gestures or massive projects. It's about touching lives, one person at a time." Her words hit Zayn like a thunderbolt. He thought about the billions involved in his Abu Dhabi project and how disconnected it felt from actual human lives. I don't know what to say," he admitted. Amira smiled softly. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it. Now come on. There's someone I want you to meet." She led him to a small office where an elderly man sat behind a desk piled high with papers. "Mr. Farouk," Amira said, "this is Zayn, the friend I told you about." Mr. Farouk stood, extending his hand. "Ah, young Mr. Al-Rashid. I've heard much about you." Zayn shook his hand, surprised. "You have?" The old man chuckled. "Indeed. Amira speaks highly of you. She tells me you're interested in community development." For the next hour, Zayn found himself engrossed in conversation with Mr. Farouk, learning about the challenges facing the community and the center's efforts to address them. He was amazed by the passion and dedication of these people, working with so little to achieve so much. As they were leaving, Mr. Farouk called out, "Mr. Al-Rashid, we're always looking for volunteers and supporters. If you're interested." Zayn nodded, a new sense of purpose filling him. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Farouk." "Thank you." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant hues. Zayn and Amira walked in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Zayn spoke. "Amira, I want to help. Not just with money, but with my time, my skills. I want to make a real difference." Amira's eyes shone with emotion. "I was hoping you'd say that. Zayn, I've seen a change in you these past weeks. You're not the same person I first met." Zayn took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Amira, I need to tell you something. The bet. The reason I first approached you, I'm so ashamed of it now, but—" "I know about the bet, Zayn," Amira interrupted gently. Zayn froze, shock written across his face. You knew." "How?" Amira sighed. "I overheard your friend Tariq talking about it in the lobby one day. I was hurt and angry at first, but then I saw how you were changing, how genuine your interest in literature and psychology became. I decided to give you a chance to prove yourself." Zayn felt a mix of shame and relief wash over him. "Amira, I'm so sorry. That bet, it was childish and disrespectful. I never meant—" Amira placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "I know, Zayn. What matters is who you are now and who you're trying to become." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Zayn felt his heart racing, aware of how close they were standing. Suddenly, a car horn blared, breaking the spell. They both jumped, then laughed nervously. "I should go," Amira said, a hint of reluctance in her voice. "I have a night class." Zain nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As Amira turned to leave, he called out, "Amira, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? To discuss how I can get more involved with the community center?" Amira paused, then smiled. "I'd like that, Zain. I'd like that very much." As he watched her walk away, Zain felt a sense of elation and purpose he'd never experienced before. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. His family, especially Uncle Faisal, would likely oppose his new direction. The world he'd grown up in would not understand his choices. But for the first time in his life, Zain felt he was on the right path. As he walked back to his car, he began making mental notes of all the ways he could help the community center. He thought about the skills he'd learned in business that could be applied to non-profit work, about the connections he could leverage for fundraising. Zain al-Rashid was a changed man, and he was ready to change the world around him, one small step at a time. Little did he know that his newfound purpose was about to be put to the test. As he drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Faisal. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Your presence is required. We need to discuss the future of Al-Rashid Enterprises." Zain's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He knew that tomorrow would bring a confrontation he couldn't avoid. But as he thought of Amira, of Mr. Farouk, of the children's laughter at the community center, he felt a strength he'd never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Zain was ready to face them. The man who had entered Abu Dhabi weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone new, someone better. And this new Zain was prepared to fight for what he believed in, no matter the cost. The morning sun had barely risen over Dubai's skyline when Zain strode into the Al-Rashid Enterprises boardroom. The tension in the air was palpable as he took his seat, facing the stern gazes of the board members and his uncle Faisal. "Zain," Faisal began, his voice grave, "we've called this meeting to discuss some concerns about your recent behavior and decisions." Zain sat up straighter, his resolve strengthening. "What concerns exactly?" Faisal's eyes narrowed. "Your sudden interest in that community center, for one. Your distraction during the Abu Dhabi project. And most alarmingly, your relationship with a certain cleaning girl." Zain felt a flash of anger at the dismissive way Faisal referred to Amira, but he kept his composure. "Her name is Amira," he said calmly, "and she's shown me a side of life I never knew existed. A side where success isn't measured in dollars but in lives improved." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Faisal leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Zain, you are the heir to this empire. Your father built this company from nothing, and it's your duty to continue his legacy. We can't have you distracted by charitable impulses." For a moment, Zain was transported back to his childhood, always striving to meet his father's expectations, to make him proud. But then he thought of Amira's smile, of Mr. Farouk's dedication, of the children at the community center. He took a deep breath. "You're right, Uncle," Zain said, his voice steady. "I do have a duty, but not just to this company. I have a duty to use the privileges I've been given to make a real difference in the world." He stood up, addressing the entire board. "Gentlemen, I propose a new direction for Al-Rashid Enterprises, one that combines profitable ventures with significant social impact. Imagine affordable housing projects that don't compromise on quality, community development initiatives that create jobs and improve lives, educational programs that nurture the next generation of innovators and leaders." The boardroom erupted in a mix of outrage and curiosity. Some members shouted objections, while others leaned in, intrigued by Zain's vision. Faisal slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! Zain, you're talking about dismantling everything we've built. I won't allow it." Zain met his uncle's gaze unflinchingly. "I'm not talking about dismantling anything, Uncle. I'm talking about evolution, about ensuring that the Al-Rashid name stands for more than just wealth. It can stand for progress, for positive change." For hours, the debate raged. Zain presented data, projections, and case studies showing how socially responsible businesses were not only sustainable, but often more profitable in the long run. He spoke with a passion and conviction that surprised even himself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the boardroom, a tentative consensus emerged. The board agreed to a pilot program, allowing Zain to implement his ideas on a small scale, with the promise of expansion if successful. Exhausted but exhilarated, Zain left the boardroom. He checked his phone, seeing a message from Amira. Good luck today. Remember, true strength comes from staying true to your values." With a smile, he typed back, "It went better than I could have hoped. Can't wait to tell you all about it at dinner." That evening, as Zain and Amira sat in a small family-owned restaurant in her neighborhood, he recounted the day's events. Amira listened, her eyes shining with pride and something deeper, something that made Zain's heart race. "You did it, Zain," she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You stood up for what you believe in." Zain squeezed her hand, marveling at how natural it felt. "I couldn't have done it without you, Amira. You opened my eyes to a whole new world." As they talked late into the night, sharing dreams and plans for the future, Zain realized that his journey was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, opposition to face, and old habits to break. But with Amira by his side, and a newfound sense of purpose in his heart, he felt ready to face anything. In the months that followed, Zain threw himself into his new projects with the same determination he had once applied to chasing profits. The pilot program exceeded all expectations, bringing affordable housing to hundreds of families and creating jobs in underserved communities. The community center where it all began flourished under Zain and Amira's joint efforts. New programs were launched, more volunteers recruited, and lives were changed one day at a time. Zain's relationship with his uncle Faisal remained strained, but there was a grudging respect developing between them. Even Faisal had to admit that Zain's new direction was bringing positive attention to the Al-Rashid name. As for Zain and Amira, their bond deepened with each passing day. They challenged each other, supported each other, and together they were building something beautiful, not just in their personal lives, but in the world around them. 1 year to the day after their first coffee date, Zain took Amira back to the same cafe. As they sat across from each other, both with well-worn copies of Love in the Time of Cholera in front of them, Zain marveled at how much had changed. "You know," he said, a smile playing on his lips, "I once made a foolish bet about you, but I ended up winning something far more valuable than I could have ever imagined." Amira raised an eyebrow, her eyes twinkling. "Oh? And what's that?" Zain reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "A partner, a purpose, a love that transforms and elevates. Amira, you didn't just change my life, you gave me a new one." As they leaned in, their lips meeting in a tender kiss, Zain knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Together they would continue to grow, to challenge each other, and to make a difference in the world. The journey that had begun with a superficial bet had led to profound change, not just for Zain and Amira, but for countless lives they would touch in the years to come. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of true connection and shared purpose, Zain al-Rashid finally understood the real meaning of wealth. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Zain and Amira's journey has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional voyage, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments.